Greg Gorman is a true Hollywood legend who has taken pictures of the biggest stars in the world, and his work has been featured in magazines like Esquire, GQ, Life, Vogue, and Rolling Stone, just to name a few. He has also become known for his figure studies of the male and female nudes, and he is currently doing workshops around the world. We were lucky enough to sit down with him for this very special episode of our podcast, so I hope you enjoy our interview with the living legend, Greg Gorman. Okay, then we're going. Greg, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Do you remember your first camera?
I do. The very first camera that I bought was a Pentax, Honeywell Pentax, which was the very first single lens reflex, and it actually had the lenses actually screwed in before bayonet mount lenses. And then I moved on to a Minolta SRT 101 and putzed around with a few variations on a theme after that, but ended up shooting primarily most of my career with a Hasselblad.
Wow, yeah.
Shot with a Fuji's RZ67 or 68, I guess, and as well with primarily a Hasselblad. I guess the majority of the campaigns and personality portraits in the early days were shot medium format until the world of digital came along.
Exactly. Do you like to test new cameras and new gears, or are you into that, or just do you find a camera that you prefer and then you stick to that?
I'm always curious with cameras that come out. I would say if I test anything, ironically, the cameras that I test the most are point-and-shoot cameras, but I've settled in on the one that I think is the best, so that I've used now for the last 5 or 6 years, which is the Sony, I think it's the RX. It's a little point-and-shoot. I don't even know the number of this camera, but
you can just have it with you all the time. Yeah, you have it in your pocket there.
It's a brilliant little camera. It's a there's all these cameras have so damn many numbers.
Yeah, I know.
This is the RX10, RX106, I should say. But it's got a 24 to 200 zoom. It's big files, 20-some megabytes. And it's a great camera.
Yeah, and you can have it with you all the time.
And I mean, even in my last book, I did a book of male portraits and nudes that came out in 2015. Yeah. There's actually shots that I'd shot that were test shots that I shot with this camera that I blew up 30 by 40.
And it works.
They hold up beautifully.
Exactly. That's amazing. We're going to talk more about like tech after a while, but I'm always curious. I always ask people who love what they do and how they got started. So do you remember like when you first got into photography?
I do. The first time I picked up a camera was in 1968. I borrowed a buddy of mine's camera to shoot a Jimi Hendrix concert, not having a clue of what the hell to do. And he said, shoot Tri-X film, put it at f5.6, 60th of a second, and you'll get an exposure. And that's what I did. And the following morning, I processed the pictures in his dark room in the basement of his house. And when I saw that first picture coming up in the tray, I was hooked. And it was kind of soft focus, and I wasn't sure if it was out of focus because I shot at a 60th of a second or I'd smoked too much dope that night. That was back in the hippie days, the late 60s. So that's where it all began.
And then just like... Never looked back since?
Well, I enrolled in the only courses they were teaching at the University of Kansas where I went to school were courses in photojournalism. And so I enrolled in that kind of ambulance chasing pictures, but spent a weekend in Washington, D.C. It was during the time of the Vietnam War, and 4 of us drove down and shot pictures, which was kind of cool.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about like, I was asked this as well, like, and I have this sort of like, before I got into film as well myself, the fact that you can making a living out of it, was that your intention at the beginning, or was it just to see how fun it was and then took it from there?
You know, it didn't really cross my mind. It happened so fast. I went to photojournalism school, but learned from a dear friend of mine that was a tech rep for Eastman Kodak that if I was serious about photography, I should go to a real, maybe film school, not a still photography school. So I moved to California where my father was living and went to school at USC and actually got a Master of Fine Arts in Cinematography from USC. But being a control freak, I returned to my love of stills and still photography and basically pretty much self-taught.
Yeah.
Working with movie lights, which I learned in film school. You were telling me you went to film school. And so I was working at the beginning of my career. I couldn't afford to buy strobes. Yeah. I think in Europe they call them flash, right? We refer to...
Flash, yeah.
In the States, it's more strobes. Same thing. But I was shooting with 1K quartz lights and 2K softboxes in the early days. Those are the lights that I could afford.
And then yeah, like restrictions often can spur some creativity, I can imagine.
Well, it's funny because through most of my commercial career, I worked with flash, with strobes, and I had a big 6K HMI, which back in the day I think cost me $30,000. You know, for a 6K HMI Aeroflex Airy with a ballast and all. And now I shoot with rhodolites. I shoot with LEDs. So I'm shooting continuous light today much more than I am flash.
I tried to do that as well, and it's more.
You get a more spontaneous capture when you're shooting with somebody rather than that pop of a flash, and it's much more. I think it's much more natural, and it has a much more linear flow in terms of taking pictures.
And it's not that disturbing for the model either.
No,
like it's a lot more calmer, more natural experience. Yeah, you can relax a bit more.
I think you get the moments in between, which oftentimes you lose with flash.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the burst mode on the camera as well, so you can just shoot.
Yeah, you shoot, and that's one of the things I tell my students when I'm teaching workshops, pixels are free. It's not like the old days with film. Shoot some pictures. You get your shot set up, hold the trigger down, put your camera on high speed.
Yeah.
I mean, look at a lot of people today have taken it to the extreme, and they're not even shooting stills anymore. They're just shooting with a red camera, and they're pulling the stills off of that.
Exactly. Yeah. That's amazing. Back to the early days, I'm always also very curious about when because like at the beginning you have to like chase jobs and like get jobs and like try to make a living out of it, and then you have to call people, cold calling and stuff like that. Was that?
Well, it was very funny how mine started. I never really talk about it when I'm lecturing, which is kind of funny, but I was driving a truck delivering photographic supplies in LA in between my gig at USC finishing college, and I was doing headshots for actors and actresses because they were abundant in California. Everybody's an actor. Yeah. They all work in restaurants, but they're all pursuing careers in film or TV or stage. And so I was doing headshots for $35 a day, and that included film and processing. And I was bulk loading my film from those 100-foot Kodak Tri-X rolls in a little machine, and I thought it was great. And slowly that fee went from 35 to 50 to 75, I think up to about 300. And so I was making a little bit of, spare money on the side, and that's kind of how it all began.
And how long did you do that for?
Well, a couple of years while I was finishing college at USC. And then, I did a few misandry jobs, but I started working with a girlfriend of mine was working for a film company called Interocean Films, and she asked me if I could design press books and one sheets, and I said sure, having no idea what the hell a press sheet or a press book or a one sheet was.
You couldn't Google it either.
But I figured, if this is a job, and so I started doing design and layout for movies. They were packaging films that were originally created for television. They were packaging them as feature films abroad, and so that's kind of where it all began. And then little by little, I started doing some editorial, and that led to working actually with some people, and I got some work in the movie business early on and some big clients early on, which really makes a big difference. You can be a great photographer and extremely talented, but if you don't get those breaks, you can go unnoticed so easily in this world.
You need that one like public figure to give your name to someone.
It's like, it was like, I know in the early days, I was working on a feature film, and the actress got replaced by Barbra Streisand, and she called me up and says, "Greg, it's Barbara." Yeah. And I didn't know her, and she says, "So tell me, who have you shot?" Without having the big names in your portfolio, it's hard to get the other ones. Once you've got a couple, then the rest fall in line.
Yeah. It's like a domino effect, isn't it? It's just like...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ball rolling. And when was it that you were able to integrate your style and art into the commercial work? Do you remember that?
Yes, pretty much. I was very lucky. I was working on a picture called Grease 2 that a young actor named Maxwell Caulfield was starring in. And he was kind of the darling boy of Broadway. He had starred in Entertaining Mr. Sloan on Broadway. And so he was kind of a hot ticket. And he was the lead in Grease. And at that time, Interview magazine, Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, wanted him for a cover. Well, this is exactly what we've just been talking about. I had the access to this actor because I was working on the movie. And they called me and asked me if I'd be interested in shooting a cover with him. And I did. And I integrated my style because Interview always wanted the photographer's point of view in terms of their photography. They could determine what they dressed in, how they looked, how you lit the pictures, where you shot. Different world than today. Yeah. Totally different world. And it was honestly through my time at Interview magazine and shooting 20 covers for them over the course of the 80s and 90s that really helped launch my career and develop my style of my strong highlights and harsh shadows. And with that along came a campaign I did for a small eyewear company called LA Eyeworks, where I did very dramatic portraits of actors and musicians and drag queens and art, all kinds of people. And that was I was able to utilize my style in that campaign, and that's where it kind of all began.
Yeah, and then you are, of course, based with portrait photography. And then how did you find this? Well, a lot of people can take a lot of different types of photography. There is
How did I get into shooting my nudes, my figure studies?
Yeah, but like portraits in general as well. Like, are you curious about people in general?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've never been able to shoot anything that couldn't talk back to me. I've never had any interest whatsoever in shooting a still life. I guess you could say my portraits are still lifes because I tell people to sit down and hold still. But basically, I've never shot anything except people all my life. And I thought where you were going was how did I branch off into my more fine artwork? And that's kind of a cool story because at the time that my career was really taking off, when I had done Tootsie and Big Chill and Scarface, and I was getting hired to work with all the toughest actors because they knew I could get along with them and we'd get the work. I went to New York one weekend to visit my late friend, a very famous fashion illustrator named Antonio Lopez. And this is a key takeaway for young people wanting to learn about photography and having a successful career in photography. I went to see Antonio, and I was excited because he was like the most famous fashion illustrator, and we were friends. And I was excited. I was 30-some years old and excited to show off, toot my horn. And he said, "So what are you doing, Greg?" And I said, "Well, I just shot the posters for Tootsie, Big Chill, Scarface." And I thought, well, that's going to impress him. And he looked me coldly in the eyes. He said, "That's awesome, but what are you doing for yourself?" Stopped me cold in my tracks, and I realized, God, I'm kind of a hired gun. And he said, if you want to have longevity in this business, you've got to find a creative outlet outside the realm of your commercial photography. And up to this point, as we were just talking about, I was developing my style, the strong relationship between my highlights and my shadows in terms of my pictures. And the majority of a lot of my early work was shot in very close portraits, as we were talking about. And so at this point, I decided to give myself an assignment to basically pull the camera back, shed the people of their clothes, maintain the style and integrity of my shape, form, and balance that I had developed in my portraiture, but apply it now to figure studies. And then that became my own work. I didn't have to answer to anybody else. I could create my own work. I was working now with models instead of actors. You hire a model. The models are there to interpret your vision. You work with a celebrity. They're there to promote whatever their products are, with their projects or whatever, and they're there to basically capture who they are as an individual. With a model, you can morph that a little bit and play more. So that's kind of how my whole part of my fine artwork was developed through my relationship with Antonio.
Well, in that kind of work, and I can imagine there has to be a massive amount of trust between you and the model.
Absolutely.
Like they strip down,
it's funny,
they reveal themselves.
Exactly. And it's not any different, though, Tom, in terms of working with a celebrity. You have to build a certain level of trust and confidence between the viewer, not the viewer, but the subject and the photographer, because if they don't trust you, you're not going to get the picture. So I always try to make them feel like I'm playing for their team. I share my vision with them. I'm showing them the captures, whether it was in the Polaroids in the old days or the digital capture on the back of the camera. And I discuss pretty carefully. I work very closely with talent in both fields, not only in figure study, but in terms of personality portraits.
Yeah. Then do you have like a conversation beforehand, before the shoot, where you get to know them and stuff like that, or just you show up?
Oh no, absolutely, I do. I had throughout the course of my career, I always had a full-time chef that worked for me full-time, cooked everyday meals for the shoots, whether it was. There was always breakfast, but then there was always be a sit-down lunch where we'd break bread and sometimes have a glass of wine or whatever. Yeah. But a lot of times, if I didn't know the talent during the hair and makeup process, I would sit in the makeup room and have a conversation, but I'm clocking everything at the same time, watching them in the mirror, looking at angles, figuring out what I got to play up in the highlights, play down in the shadows, so that I can then let my assistants know how to kind of basically set the framework, so to speak, for the shoot and the different setups or whatever we're doing. Then I go in and do the final buffing out, polishing of the shots.
And I can imagine, like, when you're actually doing the shoot, when you get to know them a bit beforehand as well, there can be changes at the shoots. Because I can imagine you have a very strict plan about what you want to do, but then you meet the person.
Absolutely.
And then things adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I was mentioning earlier when we talked about the fact that I got my degree in film, but I went back to the still photography because I'm such a control freak. I mean, on a film set, they'll always go for a great acting take over a camera take. But with stills, I mean, I always would be pretty well set in what I had envisioned for the people I'm shooting. But just like you said, sometimes they would come in and I would see a different side or a different approach. And so I realized shortly after kind of figuring everything out, the importance of being spontaneous and being ready for that spontaneous moment, because sometimes the best pictures are not what you've preconceived, but you have to kind of alter your vision. And sometimes those actually evolve through the setups that you have. You know, sometimes you'll have a specific setup and it's not working. And then as it starts to change and morph, you see where it's going, and then you take it to that next step.
Yeah, that's interesting. No, 'cause I can imagine, yeah, it changes with the person, and you adapt it with the person.
And by the same token, working, you know, a lot of us that worked in that whole period, Bruce Weber and Herb Ritts and myself, and we all had our own stable of stars, so to speak, that we shot all the time. I know, like a lot of times, you know, I did Bette Midler and Bowie and a lot of people in the days. We would get to know each other so well that we knew where this photo session, whenever something would come up, that we would work together, that talent would ask for a specific photographer because we knew how to light them, how to work with them, and they could start the session on a much higher level. They didn't have to get to know somebody. They didn't have to kind of feel them out and get together. We can start on a much higher level because we've already been there and done that, and then take it on from there.
Exactly, yeah. And now you're doing workshops as well. How long have you done that for?
I've been teaching for probably the better part of 30, 35 years. It's something I really do. It's what I'm doing mostly now. I don't do much commercial work. The whole business has changed so much, and doesn't interest me so much. I really feel like I've pretty much lost my passion for that aspect of my life. I don't know whether it's getting old at almost 70, but it's just that I kind of did it. The people in charge today are a different mindset, different world. Could be that I'm old and they're young and they have different ideas, and that's cool. And that's, you know, that's what it's all about. But it got to the point that it didn't interest me and hold a lot of intrigue for me anymore. And I think when you lose your passion for something, you have to take it in another direction. For me, it was teaching, because I didn't want to lose my passion for photography. And I love teaching, and I'm a pretty good teacher. I think it's something that I really enjoy. And I learn so much by teaching. You know, I learn every time I'm doing a class. Yeah. I learn more from the students probably than they learn from me.
Because I can imagine also as well, like you can sort of tell when you're watching a film or whatever, you can tell if there is passion in it or not, can you?
Totally. I mean, I think what happened for me was I got on a couple of movie sets and was shooting, and what I did was what's called special photography. They would bring me in sometime during the course of the making of a movie or at the end of a movie to shoot the one sheet, the posters. And there'd be times when they'd say, I want you to shoot Keira Knightley from this side. And I said, she's not going to look good from that side. And I said, well, that's what we want. And I said, well, that's fine. You know, you tell her. And they'd say, no, you tell her you're the photographer. And I'd say, you know, F you. Yeah. I'm not going to put my ass on the line when she knows I know how to photograph her and I know where the light needs to be. I know where the camera needs to be. I'm not going to destroy exactly what we've been talking about. The trust and confidence that they built. That's why I'm here, because of them.
Yeah.
And so this one I just thought, you know, before I become bitter about all this, it's time to check out and do something else. You know, yeah. The art directors started thinking, you know, that they were really what it was more about than the photographer. You know, and if you're going to hire a photographer to do their thing, let them do their thing.
How was that when you decided to leave commercial work like that? Was it
financially not particularly interesting, yeah, but in terms of a mindset and being able to sleep at night, a hell of a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I always say that to myself as well, and I read it in the book as well. It's something when the passion's gone, it's time to move on, and also when you're comfortable, it's time to move on as well. You should,
I think
like,
if you get too comfortable,
all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that you reach a certain level and you feel like you've been there and done that, and it's time to try something else and do something new. And for me, it was teaching, and actually I got into the world of making wine because I was always passionate about wine. So I started making wine around 2006. And just, you know, new endeavors that keep your brain fresh and keep you thinking. And teaching there couldn't be a better one really than teaching for me. It's just keeps you on your toes.
And what do you see when, like, how old are the people that you teach normally?
You know, I've had them. I would say the majority of them are successful entrepreneurs, business people, oftentimes lawyers or doctors that are passionate about photography, and this is what they want to do. And so it's kind of my job to kind of take them to that next step, help them understand their vision and create. Sometimes, you know, the technical part is bullshit. I mean, anybody can learn how to take a picture, and some people can't, but most people can learn the technical aspect. But I can't basically create an eye for somebody. You either have it or you don't. But I can show them the methods and the madness in terms of how to pose, how to get people where they need to be. And hopefully what happens is through the course of teaching, it'll open up new avenues for them, and they'll start to discover themselves more than anything else, and then what they need to bring out of their own personal life into their pictures and stuff. And that's kind of what we do.
Because I can imagine like people now are more interested in the tech than it used to be, just because the vast amount of cameras that you have available.
Well, I mean, that's what's funny. We've started before we started the take today to talk about that. And I think today, I mean, when people ask me, what advice would you give to young photographers? I say, find another gig.
Yeah.
And my boyfriend even said, you know, the world of personality photography is pretty well dead from the point of view of hiring people to create an image or do stuff. Why? Because all the celebrities today take their own selfies. So they create their own genre in terms of marketing and PR for themselves. And it's all become about social media, which I find offensive in many ways. I'm not a big social media guy. I love Facebook because I keep in touch with my friends. I'm not a big Instagram guy. I certainly realize the relevance and the critical importance of it. My boyfriend handles my Instagram account mostly, and I mean, we do all the editing of the pictures and the captions and stuff, but I let him handle it. It's just at this stage, I'm not trying to prove something, and I'm not trying to get my name out there more. I realize if I wanted to have more commercial success, perhaps that's a good avenue, but at this stage, at 70, I'd rather have a life. I mean, I'm tired of going out to dinner with people and seeing them sit there on their phones and getting a picture and getting it online. I mean, it's just, you know, there's a life in the real world besides social media.
You can't have a meal without sharing it. It's like you can't go to the gym without.
Yeah, I mean, after dinner, if I'm with friends, we'll take a picture. But I mean, people that are just constantly, I mean, it's their life. It's mainstream stuff, and I'm in the minority in that whole area. I realize that, but it's just
no. But it is like a constant struggle with people to have that addiction, to always be connected and always be available and always have the fear of missing out.
You know, well, and I think part of that, the relevance of that today is the fact that, you know, at 70. I'll be 70 in June, a couple months, is that I didn't grow up with a phone in my pocket, and I didn't grow up with a computer, you know, and there was a life in a world before electronic media. Yeah. And so many of the kids today, they've never known anything else. They've grown up. It was amazing, because one of the things that was amazing, I spent a little time with Elton and his husband this summer at their home in Nice, and they have two beautiful boys, and they don't let them have all that stuff around during the day. You know, they don't just sit there and have all that stuff, which I think is great. So they have they're being brought up much more in the real world. There's a time that they can have that and do that. But there's also time just to be present now with the people that you're with in the company.
Because I saw an interview once, and there was a guy that talked about like how creativity arrives when you're bored, when you got nothing else to think about. So like how you come up with ideas in the shower and stuff like that, because there is nothing else there, and then your mind starts going. Then if you're always busy on your phone or something, and you're very scared to be bored, then your creativity suffers from that, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, you're filling up too many of those gaps with mindless wonder. And I think one of the big things today, I know when I go to a lot of the big photography shows, you know, that are put on around the world, and I look at so much crap on the walls, these huge mindless prints of sharp, medium format camera pictures that are devoid of any content. They're just big and boring photographs that say nothing, but technically they're well done. Yeah, so much of what you see today that people are calling themselves photographers are basically graphic artists. They're not photographers.
Yeah. And I can imagine like going from, was there, do you remember the transition from analog to digital, like in the industry as a whole? I can imagine it being kind of a similar thing now, where people just can get it instantly and they can view their pictures instantly.
Yeah, I do remember, because I was shooting film, and it was probably around 2000. So I was a late bloomer. My labs were saying, do you want to take a course in Photoshop? I said, no, I mean, no, I like to shoot pictures. I think Photoshop's a good excuse for poor photography. And
fix it in post.
Yeah, you know, that was the line. And then it got to the point in shooting the motion picture campaigns with me, even the art director said, don't worry about it, we'll fix it in post. And I go, well, how are you going to fix this picture in post when I'm shooting Robert De Niro in New York and I'm shooting Ed Norton in Toronto, and you're having me light them from opposite sides, yet they're going to join each other in a photograph? You can't fix that in post. So I realized that's at the point in time when I needed to learn a little bit about Photoshop. So I steered clear of the digital cameras in the early days, because the early cameras, I played with them, sure, I had them from the very beginning, but, you know, a 3 megapixel camera in the early days could hardly live up to what you could get with a Hasselblad. So they really didn't make sense. My fascination in the early days, again, was the little point and shoot cameras because they were exciting and the digital and that whole part. So I learned more with point and shoot cameras.
Yeah.
And it was really not until Canon came out with the EOS 1DS and they had a camera that had enough information and gave you enough bang for the buck that it could compete with a medium format camera. It basically gave you the spontaneity of that 35 millimeter capture with the quality of a medium format frame.
And are you able to tell the difference between an analog picture and the digital?
It depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And same with printing. I print all my own shows. What I started doing for my personal work, Tom, in the early days with the camera, the digital cameras, is I was shooting at a higher ISO, at a non-interpolated ISO. So in other words, whatever the camera's native resolution was, let's say the ISO was, with Canon, I think it was 160. I would shoot it at 640, so I'd bump it up a couple notches, which with proper exposure and everything, you still got a little bit of noise and artifacting, but only in as much as it gave the capture a little bit more edge, a little more grit, looked a little bit more like film rather than this television look. So, and I did a project in a photojournalism project a few years back and shot very high ISOs because I knew that the end result was going to be black and white. And so I wanted that kind of gritty, noisy, grainy, so to speak, look to the captures.
Same with printing as well. Like, I print out my Instagram feed and put it on the wall, just like is good memories and stuff like that. And there's always like, there's 60 pictures that I can talk about when people come and visit. But I find it like people, they only see pictures now on like a small screen, and they don't print that much anymore. I can imagine. And there is a difference, like you can just feel the picture a bit more when it's printed.
Right.
So
well, I mean, I think it's very true, Tom, as well with books. I've published 11 books. I'm on my 12th one now. And I mean, even the publishing industry in many aspects is dying. And it's really sad because everybody's looking at everything online. And I mean, call me old school, but I mean, I want to smell that ink on the page and I want to turn that page in a book. I don't want to look at a book. I've shied away from having my books, online as ebooks and stuff. I'm not interested.
But it's the same thing with, say, writing. You're writing with a pen, and people sort of like lose the ability to do handwriting.
Right.
Just like they sort of like it's just touchpads now. Now,
and health-wise, I think it's bad. I mean, I know my back is screwed up just from sitting on my ass all the time in front of a computer. I mean, it's a crazy thing. But so many people they get carpal tunnel syndrome and sitting in a chair 24 hours a day editing and I mean I'm a victim of that as well. I shoot and then I load my pictures into Lightroom and I'm sitting there editing.
But I can imagine, like, I can see some positivity and the fact that you can put your work out there for people now. You don't have to go through like any sort of channels now anymore. So it is more accessible for people.
It's more accessible. It's more financially feasible, certainly. I remember in the old days what a fortune I spent in doing mailers and little promo books and stuff. So it's much easier to reach a mass market now, and that's where Instagram and all really comes into play for a lot of people. And so many people have made their career there. They have not a clue how to take a picture, but they're damn good marketers. And it's true in the music world. It's true in so many areas in terms of how to get everything out there.
Yeah. No, actually, I got a couple of friends who make their living out of taking iPhone pictures and putting it on Instagram.
Yeah, and then they get huge sponsorship because they have such big numbers. Huge. And when they want to endorse something, they get the money to do it. It's crazy. Yeah. And
then I come with my camera, and they don't know f-stop.
They don't know how to set an f-stop from a shutter speed.
No,
and they, I teach.
But they're happy. It makes them happy.
I have people. I've gone and it's really, in some ways it's very sad because I've gone to like Photo East and some of the shows in New York, and I've sat in on a couple of the guys. I won't name them, that have got big following on Instagram, and I've heard them. Kids sitting there asking them questions and them giving them totally the wrong answers. And I think, this is misleading the youth of today because they don't have a clue of how to do it. They don't know what an f-stop is from a shutter speed or an ISO from an ASA. They don't realize it's the same thing. It's unfortunate. Yeah. Everything's so automated today that it makes it easy. But to duplicate something is another story. They can't, they get a successful picture, which is very easy to do today. And then someone else says, "Oh, I love that picture. I'd like a portrait just like that." They would be hard pressed to try to figure out what to do because they wouldn't know.
Yeah, they can't tell where the light's coming from. They can't figure it out. I've been an advocate about like restrictions as well a lot of the time, because now you have all the gear available to you, but sometimes people say like just go out with one lens, for example, just go out with a 50 mil and then restrict yourself, and then that bursts creativity. Like I can see that be advice for aspiring, like in your workshop, do you try to apply that?
Yeah, I have different rules that I use, but I mean, I make people set their cameras, on manual and take light readings. I try to teach people how to see and understand light and how to communicate with the talent. That's the two big things, takeaways from my workshops is you get somebody in front of your camera, whether it's a portrait or a nude, and you have to be able to direct them. And it's how you talk to them, how you direct them, how you get what you want. And some people are just inarticulate and can't even convey what it is they want. And secondly, how to see and understand light, how to understand where the light's coming from and how to add light and how to subtract light. In my pictures, a lot of the cases, how to subtract light.
Yeah, so you just start with one and then...
I work generally a lot of times with a single point light source and additive and subtractive light. Yeah. I don't use usually a multitude of lights at all.
No. And what, besides the camera and the lens, what's in your, we're going to talk a little bit about gear now. What's in your camera bag at all times? What do you never leave without? What
do I not leave home without? That's a tough question. I mean, I always have up my light meter generally, and a camera generally, a couple of bodies, but I don't travel with a lot of stuff. I travel with usually a spare body, a camera. And on this trip I didn't. I brought one body and two lenses. Light meter, lots of external hard drives, lots of flash cards, lots of batteries.
It piles up
it's heavy. Yeah. I've been paranoid as hell traveling on this trip because I've got it down into a think tank case, the biggest one with 4 wheels at airporter, that I can get on the plane. But I'm always paranoid if they're going to weigh it. The damn thing probably weighs 20 kilos. It's heavy. So
what happens if they lose that though? What do you do?
Never check it.
No.
If I don't get on the plane with it, I don't get on the plane.
Yeah, you always have it with you.
I won't get on the plane. I just don't take the flight. That's never really happened. One time I had to check a lens, and that really made me nervous. I checked a 300 millimeter, 400 millimeter Canon, that big lens. It looks like it comes in a woman's attaché case, and it made me crazy. But I don't ever.
No.
Cameras and computers, if you check them, you can be sure they're going to be gone.
Yeah. I had some friends of mine who they made a short film, and they made it on film, like 35-minute film, and like they had to get it developed in Sweden, so they had to ship their the films they did that day, and then you're not supposed to X-ray, like it's not processed, it's negatives,
right?
So you're not supposed to X-ray it, and it says it on the whole thing: do not X-ray, do not X-ray. And because they didn't go themselves, they had to ship it. Some people just didn't care and then put it through an X-ray. And they lost
it all.
The whole day of shoots. Just like, so yeah, like I do the same thing. I put everything in a backpack. Right. And if it can't fit in the backpack, it doesn't go with me. Right. If I travel, right? Because I have to have it on me.
I travel very carefully, on the thing, and I'm a big guy, so this trip is 2 months for me. So even my suitcases, I've had to keep it under 50 pounds. The damn roller bag itself probably weighs 20, so. It's pretty limiting when you're packing for 2 months and weather kind of all over the map. So.
Yeah, then you have to get gear as well. I always admire, like, say you have people who document people who try to climb Everest and stuff like that, for example. Because you have to bring everything with you to survive for months. Then you also have to bring your camera gear as well.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's tough.
I don't know how to do it. Exactly.
Me neither. It's very tough. This is a weird question, but do you have a favorite camera at all? Because there isn't like one camera that fits all, but there is one camera that fits.
Yeah, I mean, my little point and shoot, I actually love.
Yeah.
I grow to love something that's concise, produces a great result, and offers me pretty much what I need. So, but I mean, I think people get way too caught up in gear. I have students that come in. I had a class I taught many years ago in Tuscany, and I had a very wealthy girl, and she came dripping with Leicas and every lens and all, and just she had so much gear that it just got in her way.
Yeah.
And I had a couple that took the class, a husband-wife team, and the wife shot with an SX70 Polaroid, and her pictures smoked the Leica gal. People get caught up that if I don't have the latest and I don't have the greatest, I can't take a great picture, and it's a fallacy. It's just like you said, show up with us. You look at most of the great photojournalists working today, and a lot of them are shooting. A lot of them are shooting Leica, and they're mostly like with either a 28 or a 35 or a 24.
Yeah, just a fixed lens and then move around. Yeah. I guess your advice to young photographers is a really good, solid one.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people try to give positive advice, but I can imagine like if you interpret it in a way to say like, don't think about the money at all, because it might not come, just do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. I think that, people that want to go out and become famous or become rich, that's a bad attitude. If you want to go out and you're really passionate about photography and you're out there shooting every day. It's funny, like I don't always have a camera on me. I rarely take pictures. And it's not that I have to shoot anything commercially or be paid to shoot, because that's rarely the case anymore of what I do. But when as I travel, most of my pictures come from somebody that I'm attracted to photographing, either physically attracted to or mentally attracted to. Yeah. They're equal. It's not that I find somebody physically that I think is beautiful, I want to photograph them, whether they're young or old or whatever, but I find something beautiful in them, or whether there's something about them that I appreciate mentally, that I have tremendous respect for them. And so then I'll shoot those people on the locations or when I travel on those. And I've done some even on the trip. So I shoot most of the pictures I've done this trip. I mean, a lot of people know me from shooting like kind of young, pretty kids and whatnot. But the funny thing is, almost all the portraits that I've done on this trip, which has been half work and half pleasure, have been older men and older men and very young girls. It's funny. It's just, you never know. It just depends what you encounter while you're there. But, the people that have come in front of my eyes since I've been here have been very intriguing older faces. I was just staying in Barcelona at a director's place, prominent Catalan director, and an amazing face. And I had him for just a few minutes in his apartment. He lived. I was renting an Airbnb from him, and he had an interesting apartment. And I just shot him for 10 minutes in his apartment with some window light. A really nice portrait. I had another guy that took one of my workshops, and he had a great face, and I photographed him.
Yeah. What do you see when you're, because you've been to Norway a couple of times now, I can imagine.
I've been quite a few times. I've taught a lot in Kristiansand.
Yeah.
And this is my second time now teaching here in Oslo.
And what do you see in the people in Norway, like that kind of like
I think they're very interesting, very earthy in many ways, but in an earthy, beautiful way, because they have beautiful eyes. And the workshops I taught in Kristiansand, we worked with people down in the harbor, seamen, and I found a very Zoftic gal that kind of looked like a Botero who I've used for a lot of my shoots. I stopped her on the street, very rotund, but beautiful girl with bright red hair and red freckles, who I work with every time I go there. And I was even one day in a bar in Kristiansand, and there were two older women, probably my age, I guess, but they were kind of like crusty bar girls, and they were awesome. And I went up to them, and I got down kind of on my knees because they were seated, and I said, listen, I think you guys have such great faces. And they stayed for the week. They were staying in a northern part of Norway, and they stayed for the week and modeled for the class. So I think really interesting faces and people to photograph here. I quite love Norway. I've had a big love affair with it since I started teaching in Kristiansand, and now having the opportunity to teach here through Interphoto at the masterclass weekends has been great. What is your
when are you here next time? Is it?
I think I'm here back in August.
In August?
Mid-August. I think we're going to try to do this again.
Yeah.
They've had pretty good success with it, and the students have been hungry for knowledge, so it's been kind of fun. And it's been great teaching with Bjorn and Julie, and of course Morten, who I met originally at the Nordic Light Festival many years ago.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to having you back in August.
Well, thanks. It's nice talking to you.